At Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal surrounded 80,000 Romans and killed nearly all of them in a single afternoon. His double envelopment tactic is still taught at military academies today. For thousands of years, battles weren't won by the biggest armies. They were won by commanders who understood how to manipulate formations, terrain, and human psychology. In this video, we'll explore 6 ancient battle tactics that changed warfare forever. From Hannibal's perfect trap to Alexander's cavalry hammer, each strategy reveals how brilliant commanders turned tactical genius into empire-building victories. Which tactic sounds most brilliant to you? Let me know in the comments. Cannae, the double envelopment. At the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal faced a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own force. The Romans deployed in their traditional formation, dense infantry center with cavalry on the flanks. They planned to crush Hannibal's center through sheer weight of numbers. Hannibal had other plans. He arranged his infantry in a convex crescent shape, bulging forward toward the Romans. His weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish infantry, formed this center. His best African infantry stood on the flanks, slightly behind the center. His cavalry positioned on the wings, outnumbering the Roman horsemen. When the battle began, the Roman infantry charged into Hannibal's center, exactly as he expected. The weak center gave ground slowly, bending backward under Roman pressure but never breaking. The Romans, sensing victory, pushed deeper into the crescent, pursuing what they thought was a retreating enemy. Meanwhile, Hannibal's cavalry destroyed the Roman horsemen on both flanks and rode behind the Roman army. At the same time, his African infantry on the flanks wheeled inward, attacking the Roman sides. The crescent had become a trap. Romans found themselves completely surrounded, enemy in front, behind, and on both sides. Packed so tightly they couldn't use their weapons effectively, the Romans were methodically slaughtered. Of approximately 80,000 Roman soldiers, only about 15,000 escaped. It was the greatest tactical defeat in Roman history and one of the most perfect examples of double envelopment ever executed. The tactic required perfect timing, disciplined troops who could execute complex maneuvers under pressure, and enemies foolish enough to walk into the trap. Hannibal had all three. Modern military doctrine still studies Cannae as the ideal encirclement battle. Gaugamela, the Hammer and Anvil. Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great faced Darius III's massive Persian army on a flat plain chosen specifically to favor Persian numbers and chariots. Alexander was outnumbered at least 2-1, possibly worse. He needed more than courage. He needed tactics that turned Persian strengths into weaknesses. Alexander's tactic was the hammer and anvil. His phalanx infantry formed the anvil, a solid, immovable wall of spears that fixed the Persian center in place. His companion cavalry, elite horsemen led by Alexander himself, formed the hammer, a striking force designed to smash through enemy formations. The battle opened with Alexander's phalanx advancing at an angle, threatening the Persian left while refusing the Macedonian left flank. This created gaps in the Persian line as units shifted to meet the threat. Alexander watched for the perfect moment, when a gap opened in the Persian formation near Darius himself. When he saw it, Alexander personally led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation directly at the gap. The cavalry crashed through, driving deep into the Persian rear. The phalanx held the Persian center in place, the anvil. Alexander's cavalry was the hammer, smashing the held enemy from an unexpected angle. Darius, seeing enemy cavalry charging directly at him, panicked and fled. His flight triggered a general Persian collapse. The hammer and anvil had worked perfectly. Infantry held the enemy fixed while cavalry delivered the killing blow from the flank or rear. This tactic required exceptional cavalry, disciplined infantry who could hold under pressure, and a commander brave or crazy enough to personally lead the decisive charge. Alexander had all three. His hammer and anvil approach won him an empire stretching from Greece to India. Would you have the courage to lead the cavalry charge like Alexander? Comment below.
The ballista. The ballista was ancient artillery, a torsion-powered weapon that fired massive bolts or stones with deadly accuracy. Invented by Greeks in the 4th century BCE and perfected by Romans, ballistas operated like giant crossbows but used twisted rope or sinew bundles to generate enormous power. The design used 2 vertical springs made from tightly wound rope, sinew, or hair. Arms inserted into these springs were pulled back, storing energy. When released, the arms snapped forward, launching a projectile from a wooden channel. The torsion system generated far more power than any bow, allowing ballistae to hurl projectiles hundreds of yards. Ballistae came in various sizes. Smaller versions fired bolts 3 feet long and could pierce multiple men in a line or punch through shields and armor. Larger versions launched stone balls weighing up to 60 pounds, smashing fortifications or crushing groups of soldiers. Romans deployed ballistae systematically. Each legion carried multiple ballistae, used both in field battles and sieges. At sieges, they positioned ballistae to suppress defenders on walls, picking off anyone who showed themselves. The psychological impact was severe. Defenders knew that stepping into the open meant instant death from a bolt they never saw coming. The accuracy was remarkable for ancient artillery. Trained crews could hit man-sized targets at 300 yards. During Julius Caesar's siege of Alesia, Roman ballistae prevented Gallic defenders from organizing effective counterattacks, pinning them behind fortifications while legionaries assaulted. Ballista bolts have been found at archaeological sites across the Roman Empire, some still embedded in walls or bones, testament to their penetrating power. The catapult. Catapults were ancient siege weapons that hurled projectiles in high arcs over walls and fortifications. Unlike ballistae that fired directly, catapults lobbed stones, burning materials, or even diseased animal corpses into besieged cities. The most common type was the onager, named after a wild ass because of its powerful tick. The onager used a single torsion spring, a bundle of twisted rope or sinew connected to a throwing arm. Soldiers wound the arm down, loading a stone into a sling or bucket at its end. When released, the arm snapped upward, hurling the projectile in a high arc. Catapults were devastating against cities. Stones weighing 50 to 100 pounds crashed through roofs, smashed buildings, and killed anyone unlucky enough to be underneath. Defenders couldn't hide behind walls because projectiles came from above. The constant bombardment wore down morale as much as it destroyed structures. Romans used catapults to hurl more than just rocks. They launched pots of burning pitch to start fires, bundles of diseased flesh to spread disease, and even severed heads of captured soldiers to terrorize defenders. At the siege of Carthage, Romans catapulted bodies over walls, adding psychological warfare to physical destruction. The engineering required careful calibration. Crews adjusted the torsion tension, the throwing arm's length, and the counterweight to achieve the right range and trajectory. Experienced artillery crews could drop stones on specific buildings after a few ranging shots. Think about defending a city while stones randomly crash through roofs. Would you rather face that or a direct assault on the walls? Comment below. The trebuchet. The trebuchet represented the ultimate evolution of ancient siege artillery, using a counterweight system to hurl massive projectiles with devastating force. Though most famous in medieval warfare, traction trebuchets appeared in ancient China by the 4th century BCE. Unlike torsion weapons, trebuchets used leverage and gravity. A long beam pivoted on a fulcrum, with a heavy counterweight on one end and a sling holding the projectile on the other. When the counterweight dropped, it pulled the beam down, whipping the sling arm upward and launching the projectile in a high arc. Early traction trebuchets relied on teams of men pulling ropes to provide the downward force. Counterweight trebuchets, which appeared later, used boxes filled with stones or earth as the power source, generating far more force than human muscles could provide. The power was extraordinary. Large trebuchets could hurl stones weighing 300 pounds over 300 yards. The impacts shattered stone walls, collapsed towers, and created breaches that made fortifications useless. The high arc meant projectiles came almost straight down, maximizing their destructive force. Trebuchets were slower than other siege weapons, taking minutes to reload and reset. But their devastating power made them worth the wait. A single, well-aimed shot could collapse a wall section that would take defenders months to repair. Beyond stones, trebuchets launched every imaginable projectile: dead horses to spread disease, beehives to create chaos, captured prisoners to demoralize defenders, pots of Greek fire to burn wooden structures. The trebuchet was as much a terror weapon as a practical tool. The siege ladders were the simplest and most desperate siege equipment. Just wooden ladders, sometimes reinforced with metal, leaned against walls while soldiers climbed under fire. Yet they remained essential throughout ancient warfare because they were cheap, portable, and required no complex engineering. The reality of ladder assaults was brutal. Soldiers climbed with shields strapped to their backs, unable to defend themselves while scaling walls. Defenders dropped rocks, poured boiling liquids, pushed ladders away with poles, or shot arrows into the crowded climbers. Casualties were horrific, but ladders had advantages. They required no preparation. Armies could use them immediately upon arriving at a siege. Multiple ladders could attack different wall sections simultaneously, spreading defenders thin. And if enough soldiers climbed quickly enough, overwhelming force could secure a foothold before defenders reacted. Successful ladder assaults required courage, bordering on madness. The first soldiers up knew they faced almost certain death, but if they held the top of the ladder long enough for others to join them, they could establish a position and let more troops flood over the walls. Romans used ladder assaults as part of combined operations. While rams battered gates and artillery suppressed defenders, ladder teams would strike at weakly defended wall sections, exploiting any gap in the defense. The siege ladder represented ancient warfare at its most personal and terrifying. No machines, no artillery, just men climbing toward almost certain death because their commander ordered it.